This video is brought to you by Squarespace. I've been having so much fun taking food photos. It's this tiny studio where you get to control the light and practice all of your skills and your composition and your art, but also it's food. I'm gonna go over first the gear that you'll need to do some food photography, including the coveted food photographer lens that you're probably going to want, as well as some tips to get you started and improve your food photos. So first, let's talk about the gear. I'll do a brief overview, and the good news is that you can pretty much start with anything. You just need a window and a camera and some food. So if you want to keep it simple, just pull out your smartphone and you can do that. But if you're looking to use your camera and you want to know different lenses, we'll get started with the camera. The good news is it's not super challenging on your camera. You don't need the latest and the greatest. You don't need a ton of frames per second. It's still, you're probably going to keep your camera on a tripod. So any old DSLR that you have or whatever you're using is probably fine. Keep in mind, full frame is going to look better in low light. But once again, if your camera's on a tripod, you just do a longer exposure. It'll be fine. Let's talk about lenses. That's more important. Now, the coveted lens for food photography is the 100mm macro lens, and that's going to allow you to get super close with details like the sesame seed on the bun or the texture of the food. A macro lens, by definition, is a 1-to-1 ratio. That means that the size of your subject is the same size in real life as it is on your sensor. So it's going to give you this close-up, detailed, beautiful look. If the lens is usually like $800 to $1,500. It's quite an investment. If you're not ready to make that, I'm going to give you a budget option in a minute. Let's talk more lenses. More good news. What you already have is probably going to work. If you have a nifty 50, that works. A 50mm is considered like a normal neutral view, pretty much what your eye sees. If you have an f1.4 50mm, it's going to give you some shallow depth of field, a bunch of light, and it's versatile, great lens. As far as primes go, food photographers often use a 35mm lens as well. It's a little more wide angle. You can get closer and get more interesting angles. A lot of people think that primes are sharper, but if you have really sharp zooms, that's fine. I used a 24-70 for a lot of these. It's the Sony G Master, so it's super sharp, and you get wide angle and you get zoomed. So the reason why you'll want a nice zoom like the 100mm or a 70mm or an 85mm is because it causes compression when you zoom in, and that means that subjects in your foreground and your background appear closer together. So if you have a juicy burger with some fries in the background, they're going to seem closer and create a different story and look very nice. I'm also using the 85mm f1.2, and it's just a really interesting focal length. It gives you some of that compression. It's super sharp, and it's also f1.2, so you get a bunch of background blur if that's what you need, but you might not. I'll get into that when we get into the techniques. If you want those macro shots, but you don't want to spend the money on a macro lens, you can use extension tubes, and that's just an empty plastic tube that you put between your camera and your lens, and it helps you get more magnification so you can get the macro look. You might not get the perfect 1-to-1 ratio, but you will get closer, and some of the pros is that they're inexpensive. You can get them for $30 used to like $80 for the set that I got. They're more expensive. They go up to hundreds, but you don't really need that. The cons are that it can reduce the sharpness a little bit of light. It's not going to be as sharp as the macro lens, but they're still good. It's also going to limit your focal range, so you might not be able to focus from far away. There are some drawbacks, but like for $30, $50, like come on, it's affordable. Let's talk about other gear, because the accessories are so much fun in food photography, and they can also be affordable. So if you are using natural light, the light is free. It's the correct temperature. It makes food look appealing. There's a lot to love about natural light, but you may also want a strobe like I have here. It's easy to control, it's more consistent, and it's easier to manipulate. Another thing that you will probably want is a tripod, which you can see my camera is on here. Not only does that get you the steady shots, but you're going to find you're doing a lot of things where you need two hands. So I also have a remote shutter release hooked up here, and this allows me to press a button to get a picture. And while I'm taking the picture, I can use my other hand to sprinkle things, pour syrup, whatever it is that you want to do to style your picture. If you don't want to buy a remote shutter release, you can also use the timer on your camera. You will want all sorts of gobos, reflectors like this, so that you can bounce light. Look at it bouncing on me. You'll also want a black one so that you can absorb light, so that you're creating more shadows. You might already have these for portraits, but this is just a poster board. And this is actually the back of one of my pictures, just some cardstock. Again, the nice thing about food photography is it's on a small scale, so you don't have to buy big, expensive stuff. You can see I have large ones for portraits behind me, but you don't need those here. Another accessory I like is this spray bottle. People like droplets on their food. This is gonna help you do it. And then you can go to the hardware store and get a bunch of other things like backgrounds, backdrops. You want all sorts of beautiful textured things to put your food on, plates, cutlery, any accessories you can think of. That's where it gets really fun. Before we get into the techniques and the tips, I want to take a moment to thank my sponsor, Squarespace. When you take your beautiful food photos, you're going to want a place to put them. Maybe so a restaurant can hire you to take them professionally. And you want them to see your best photos first, not just to stream on social media. So you'll need your very own Squarespace website. That's where I host my photos. Try it out for 14 days for free to see if you like it. You don't have to sign up and remember to cancel. It just cancels on its own. I really think you're gonna like it. You can book clients there. You can have an About Me page. Go to squarespace.com/Chelsea and use the coupon code Chelsea to get 10% off. Thanks, Squarespace. Now for the fun part, let's talk about tips to improve your photos. I think the most important thing is that you learn how to control your light. Even if it's window light, you're going to want some control. So you want directional lighting, usually side lighting, and that's going to give you some texture, some depth, and some interest. Front lighting is going to make things appear flat. It's going to give you even lighting, but it might not be very appealing. Even if you're using natural lighting, that's when you'll want to be bouncing and shaping your light. So you might want to put this black gobo on one side so that you're getting more directional light from your window, or maybe you want to bounce the light with your white gobo, gobo stands for go between, and add some more light to your subject. Either way, you can play around with the lighting and see how it impacts your food. Now, one mistake that I see people make is mixed lighting. I used to review hundreds and hundreds of food photos, and the thing that made the food look the least appetizing is when people had fluorescent lighting or incandescent lighting from a lamp mixed with natural lighting, and it just created an unappealing look. You really want the colors to be balanced. We have this primal instinctive part of us that knows what food should look like to be safe to eat. So when colors are off, it really just naturally bumps people the wrong way. So use daylight for that nice balanced light instead of lamps, or use a proper strobe balanced to daylight, which is between 50 and 60 K color temperature. If you're using a strobe with a window, make sure that you match the lighting so that you don't have two different color lights. Side lighting does create depth and texture and shadows, but you might want backlighting to also show texture if you have something like a thin cut of citrus fruit, or if you're taking pictures of a beverage and you want to show some transparency and light it up and show some color. So there aren't rules per se. You can experiment and see what works for you. But I recommend that you just try all of it and have fun. And because it's on a small scale, I find it even more fun because you're not adjusting huge things. You're just kind of rearranging things in a small space. It's so much more controllable and interesting to me. The next thing I want to talk about is color theory. It's always important in photography, but very important in food photography. Again, because we have this instinctive part of us that knows what color food should be to be safe. But aside from your color balance being correct on your food, you want to accentuate your food with the correct colors. And that's when color theory comes into play. So take a look at this picture of these blueberries. I put them in an orange bowl because blue and orange are opposite of each other on the color wheel, and they are complementary colors. So it's actually bringing out the blue of the blueberries, but it's a muted orange, so it's not overpowering them. It's a very natural orange, so it makes you feel like this is still very natural, like fresh picked blueberries. So think about that. You can learn more about color theory. I made an entire video about it, and I'll put it in the description down below, the link, so you can watch that if you're interested. Aside from color theory, you want to use colors intelligently. You don't want to overpower the food with colors that are too bright. So if you have a beautiful seared salmon, you don't want super bright primary colors around it that are taking people's eye away from the subject. You usually want things to be a little more muted and not competing with the food. So consider that when you're styling your food. Let's talk about some basic compositional tips. When you're taking pictures of the food, some foods you'll want to shoot from overhead, some you'll want to shoot straight on, and some you'll want to shoot down on at a 45-degree angle. It depends on the food. So if you have something tall and stacked like a burger, you can shoot it straight on or a little bit from an overhead angle. If you have something completely flat that's not going to convey from the side like a plate of pasta, you'll want to shoot overhead and down on your subject. You can play with different angles for all different foods and see what works for which foods. Experimentation is really important, but when you set up your scene, be prepared to move around and try different angles and different compositions. You'll also want to give some space in your compositions. You'll want to know how to balance things, so you can use the rule of thirds, which is a simple compositional theory. It's just drawing a grid line and putting things in the corner of the grid, but I recommend kind of expanding from that and moving things around the frame in a way that balances your photo. Consider balancing things not only with objects in the frame, but with colors to pull interest and balance the photo. And remember, the food is the star of the show, so don't overpower it with too much stuff. The compositional tips you used in other photography still apply here, so remember to create depth, and you do that by creating layers in your photos, something in the foreground, something in the background. In my s'mores photo, I put the s'more in the front, but I put a little bit of chocolate in the back and some marshmallows just to create a little bit of storytelling while creating depth. You can even put things in the foreground and blur them out so that you get this appearance of looking past something at your food, and it's going to make it a little more engaging of a photo. Let's talk about a few styling secrets. So we already talked about knowing color theory, using the color wheel, but we also need to think about texture and storytelling. So let's go back to the blueberries again. They're a natural item. They're very simple. And so I like to see them in a more natural container with a natural background because I want them to look fresh. If I had them in a more sterile environment like stainless steel, then it starts to look clinical. You want the food to match the environment. Now, if I were to compare this to something very fancy, like if I had a plate of fancy fish with all sorts of beautiful plating, then everything would want to look a lot cleaner. But with these fruit pictures that I took, I wanted it to look simple. And with the s'more picture, I put it on wood because it reminds me of summer and campfires, and I wanted to harken back to that natural look. Remember to mix textures. A tip is to use matte surfaces, your background, your plates. You don't want anything to be too shiny and seeing reflections of the light or the camera or anything in them. It could provide too much glare and not really be appealing. So think about natural stones, natural surfaces. You can pick up some tiles at the hardware store. That's what I have here. They're just wood tiles. And don't forget to mix those textures as well. You could have something smooth and porcelain mixed with wood, mixed with marble. You want to mix all of these textures together to get a natural look. It also helps if things aren't too perfect. It can look sterile. So it's not a bad thing to add some drops, some drizzled, some crumbs to bring that natural food look back to your picture. And my last tips have to do with settings. I'm going to keep it simple because it might be different in all different environments, but as a basic rule, you want to keep your ISO low. So if you're able, keep it at about 100, and you can do a longer shutter speed if need be, if your camera's on a tripod. For your aperture, I want you to shoot at every aperture and experiment. You're probably going to end up somewhere around f4, depending on how you're taking pictures of your food, but you don't want so little in focus that there's just a tiny sliver in focus. And that can happen if your aperture is wide open and you have something like f1.4 or f2.8. You can end up with so little in focus that it's not really conveying a beautiful picture. So experiment with that depth of field to see what works for you. And for your shutter speed, well, it doesn't matter if you're using a strobe. Like you're gonna have to use 1/200th or 1/250th to sync with your strobe. If you're using natural light, you'll want your shutter speed low enough that you can have a low ISO at like 100. So if you're having a hard time getting a low shutter speed handheld, just put it on your tripod, and be sure to check your pictures and make sure you're not getting camera shake if you're hand holding. That's not even close to it. There's so much to do with the food prep, the food styling. I recommend just buying some pre-prepared food when you first start because styling takes a very long time. You can use simple berries like I did and then grow from there and learn how to plate better and learn how to style your composition better. But it's a lot of fun. It's a good indoor activity if it's too hot, too cold, or if you're thinking about getting into taking pictures for restaurants. Thank you for watching. Leave your tips in the comments below, and thank you Squarespace for making this video possible. If you want your own website, you want to look professional, you want contracts, you want galleries, go to squarespace.com/Chelsea and use the coupon code Chelsea to get 10% off. Thanks.